All right, it's Tuesday here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's only Tuesday, but it feels like well, I can't say it feels like it's Friday because Friday's cool. I like Thursdays too because Thursday is like the day before Friday, so that's cool. So I can't really count it as that. It just feels like it's been a long week already, even though it's only Tuesday. There is a lot going on. And certainly if you've been following the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, following the stuff we've been reporting and posting there, you know everything that's going on because there's a whole lot of it happening right now. And, last week was a crazy, hectic week. This week is shaping up to be nothing less. And the place you need to be to stay on top of all of it is right there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We're 8 days away from National Letter of Intent Signing Day next Wednesday. And you know that you need to be on Panther-Lair.com from now until then, so you're on top of everything that's going on. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And of course, we have our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have live streams every Wednesday night. We'll do that tomorrow night at 8:30 just to talk live about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. That's always exciting because you can get there on the right side of your screen and post your comments and questions in the chat. And we sort of have a little back and forth. It's a lot of fun. And then, of course, we have these daily videos, Monday through Friday, these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week. Something new that comes out just for something to talk about, think about, and dwell on in the world of Pitt sports. Whatever happened that I think you need to know about or we want to talk about, it'll be right there on the Morning Pitt videos, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The subscribe button is right down there, somewhere on the right side of your screen. Click that thing. Turn on notifications if you want to get an alert sent to your phone every time we post a new video or we go live. That way you don't miss anything. But mostly just subscribe and like this video. We will appreciate it if you can do that. And there was some transfer news last night. Pitt didn't get anyone, at least not before I went to bed. Pitt didn't get anyone last night, but a very interesting addition or entry into the transfer portal. And it comes out of Baton Rouge, but it originally comes out of Western Pennsylvania. And it's LSU safety Derek Davis, second-year player. He's a sophomore this year at LSU. I think he only played a handful of games, so he might be eligible for a red shirt. But originally a four-star prospect out of Gateway High School. I'm just double checking on Davis's participation this year because I'm fairly confident he only played in 4 games. Let me just look and make sure. Yeah, he played 4 games this year, so he's eligible for a red shirt. So he's got 3 years of eligibility left. More importantly, kid out of Gateway, stud recruit, guy who certainly had offers from everywhere and took a little bit of a look at Pitt. Ended up at LSU, played mostly on special teams last season. Played a little bit on special teams this season, decided he's going to go into the transfer portal and try to find a new home. And this was a transfer that had been rumored for a little bit over the last week, 2 weeks or so. Certainly some rumors on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com about Derek Davis going into the transfer portal and the possibility of Pitt landing him. And, I think there's some ins and outs to that situation. We're not going to dive too deep into Pitt's chances of landing Derek Davis. We certainly have a lot of coverage of that on the message board. I posted some stuff last night. We'll have more posts this morning, more information on that situation as it develops. Davis is interesting to me. I think Pitt, he's like 6 foot, 6'1", 210 pounds, somewhere around there. So, potentially an outside linebacker, potentially a safety. But he's really interesting to me because in the last game that he played for LSU, he lined up at running back, carried the ball 5 times for 28 yards or something like that. And that might actually be possibly where he would end up at Pitt. We've seen the Panthers, we've seen the coaching staff kick the tires on some transfer running back prospects and possibilities, and perhaps they might look at Davis and see the kind of transfer running back they're looking for. And that might actually be his position. Even when he was coming out of Gateway, I think there were some questions about his ability as a defensive player, or at least as a defensive back. And so his future might actually be on offense, which is pretty intriguing. Certainly if the guy in the left of the picture there, Izzy Benicanda, if he does not come back, and I don't think any of us expect him to come back, If he does not come back, then you could be looking at a situation where a transfer running back would fit in pretty well. If we assume Abanikanda is not returning, if we assume Vincent Davis is not returning, that's Rodney Hammond and Sebo Flemister, and plus incoming recruits. And I think they'll get 2 freshman running backs in this class. But there could be room for a transfer to fit in there as well. So maybe that's a possibility. Maybe that's something that the coaches look at, and maybe that's something Davis is interested in as well. And so we'll see how that situation plays out. But I just couldn't help but think about, as we move through this transfer cycle. And it's this year, but it's also a couple instances in previous years. There have been local players who left the area and then end up transferring back, or in some cases considering transferring back. And I started thinking about it because, like I say, when Derek Davis went into the transfer portal, and even some of the rumors before he went into the portal, that Pitt was a prominent school for him, that Pitt was a school he was really looking at, and he took a really serious look at Pitt as a high school recruit. I think he gave Pitt more of a look than a lot of people thought he did at the time. I think Pitt was more in contention for Derek Davis coming out of high school than a lot of people believed. They ultimately didn't get him. I don't even remember if he took an official visit, but it was a moot point. I think it was known they weren't going to get him, but there was some genuine interest for quite some time. And so it only sort of made sense that would be the rumor when he goes into the transfer portal, that he would look at Pitt again. What I think is interesting is you've got a couple of guys in this class right now, this class of transfers, where you've got Derek Davis transferring out of LSU, potentially looking at Pitt. You've got Donovan McMillan, the safety from Peters Township, transferring out of Florida, looking at Pitt, maybe heavily leaning toward Pitt. You've got Phil Dracovic, the quarterback from Pine Richland, who went to Notre Dame, turned down Pitt once to go to Notre Dame coming out of high school. Turned down Pitt again to go to Boston College when he transferred out of Notre Dame. And granted, at that point, Pitt still had Kenny Pickett coming back, and they had just landed Joey Yellen out of the transfer portal. What were they going to do? You just got your guy in Joey Yellen. That was the guy Mark Whipple really liked. Turned them down twice, and now is headed back to Pitt. You go a couple years back. Before that, you have MJ Devonshire out of Aliquippa, right? Ends up going to Kentucky. Turns down Pitt and goes to Kentucky with a signing day commitment. I can still remember I drove up to Aliquippa High School for that. Ends up transferring back to Pitt. You could go back before that. Johnny Patrician out of Central Catholic seemed to be leaning heavily toward Pitt. Ends up going to Penn State, transfers back, and has a pretty successful career. And it's interesting to see these things develop. And it's not, I can't say this is happening with a majority of WPIAL guys who leave. I was, before I sat down here to tape this, I was looking at, top 20 PA recruits from the last 5 or 6 years and looking at some of the top WPIAL guys, and most of them have not transferred. Most of them have not left their schools and transferred to other schools. Most of them have not left their schools and transferred to Pitt. Most of them are still at the schools that they signed with out of high school. And so it's not the majority of guys, but there is something of a growing trend. And more to the point here is I wonder if it will continue to be a growing trend as we see WPIAL players, Western Pennsylvania players, leaving the area pretty consistently, right? The closest they're getting to home is they might go to Penn State, or they'll go to Ohio State, or they'll go further away. And it's not a new thing. It's been happening for a while. Even you could roll the clock back to like the Dave Wanstead years. Dave Wanstead never got everyone he wanted in Western Pennsylvania. There were guys every year that got away. But certainly in the last 6 years, 8 years, under Pat Narduzzi, it's been tough. And I don't know if that's necessarily an indictment on Narduzzi. I think whatever cracks in Pitt's wall around Western Pennsylvania started to really show a couple years before Narduzzi arrived. I think after the firing of Dave Wanstead, who, again, talked about building a wall around Western Pennsylvania, never quite pulled off that wall, but it was, better part of a wall. It was, kept most guys in. But it started to show some cracks. It started to have some leaks, and it started kind of crumbling a little bit, really through the Paul Chryst years. And again, I don't know if that's entirely on Paul Chryst. Some of it is. Some of it's on Paul Chryst and his coaching staff. Joe Rudolph, I think, was a really good recruiter. Chris Herring was also doing a lot of the local recruiting at that point. Some of the assistant coaches were trying to chip in on local recruiting, and it just never really took hold. And I think that was when you started seeing some guys getting away. I mean, like a Drayvon Henry or a Robert Foster. You started seeing some guys that, and maybe not both of those guys, but you started seeing guys that in previous years you would have expected Pitt to hold on to, particularly guys from Aliquippa. I mean, Aliquippa is a great example as a pipeline school that all of a sudden wasn't being a pipeline anymore. And some of that's on the coaching staff for sort of losing those relationships or losing that pipeline or losing that connection. And some of it's on, and I've talked about this before, about the changing world of recruiting, of what, Twitter to some extent, Huddle to an even greater extent, how they've really opened up the world of recruiting, that you're not limited just to the places that your high school coach is willing to mail a DVD, or the places that your high school coach is willing to mail a videotape. You now can send your Huddle link to any school from Oregon to Miami, and everywhere in between. You are not limited by geography anymore. Now, a lot of schools are, you might not get recruited by every school between Oregon and or Washington and Miami. But you do have the option. It is far easier to reach out to those schools and make connections with those schools. And so you start seeing guys drifting away a little bit more. And though even though somebody like Drayvon Henry went to West Virginia, I think the whole process opened some eyes for kids, for their parents, for the people around them of saying, you don't actually have to stay here. You don't have to actually stay in this area. There are actually options outside of 724 area code or 412 area code. And so kids started leaking away. Kids started getting away. And every now and then you would hear stories that, oh, you remember that guy? He's trying to transfer to us. We don't even want him at this point. And this would go back to like the Wanstead era. There'd be guys that they lost, and then a couple years later, I'd be just having some casual conversation with somebody on the staff, and they'd say, oh, you remember so-and-so? Yeah, he wants to transfer here. We keep telling him no. And so, none of this is necessarily a new phenomena, but I definitely think whatever leaks started showing in the wall around Western Pennsylvania, starting in those Paul Chryst years, I think they continued through the Pat Narduzzi years. And then you sort of, I think there's another element at play with Narduzzi where he's offered fewer Western Pennsylvania prospects than his predecessors did. And I think Paul Chryst probably offered fewer than Dave Wanstead did. I don't know what Todd Graham did. I just don't know what Todd Graham did. But I think the numbers are even down for Pat Narduzzi, and part of that is due to, fewer Power 5 caliber prospects in Western Pennsylvania, and part of it is probably trying to be more selective because they're not even, they were missing on a lot of the guys they were trying to get. And so it's been an ongoing process of these guys going away. But what's interesting is with the advent of the transfer portal and with the transfer portal being more commonplace and being more sort of accepted and just being a part of life in college football and all college sports, really, it's interesting. It will be interesting to watch how many local stars sort of follow this path. There was Patrician, and then there was Devonshire, and now there's 4 guys who are potentially considering coming home. Now, Dante Cephas from Penn Hills, who went to Kent State, he doesn't necessarily count. He wasn't necessarily a prospect who chose Kent State over Pitt. He had academic issues coming out of high school, and Pitt they didn't really pursue him. They didn't offer him. But Phil Dracovic, Donovan McMillan, Derek Davis, these are guys who had, who were priority targets for Pitt, and they went elsewhere. And now Drakovic's coming home. And it seems like there's a pretty good chance that McMillan and Davis might be as well. And so I wonder, as we move through this transfer portal phase, and other schools might have something similar. I'm not sure if other schools have the same kind of situation that Pitt faces, but I definitely think it could be the case with Pitt where you see more and more of these guys coming home, going away to college for a couple years, and then saying, you know what, I actually do want to go play at Pitt. I actually don't like being where I am. And all of these guys will have different reasons for transferring. Not all of them are just homesick or something like that. And the reality is, too, that a decent number of players who go into the transfer portal do so because they can't play at the level where they, originally signed. There will be WPIAL players, and there probably have been, who will go to Power 5 schools and go into the portal and end up at G5 schools or end up at FCS schools. There'll be WPIAL players who go to G5 schools and end up at FCS or going down to D2 or something like that. That's part of... honestly, I think it's part of the advantage of the transfer portal because it gives you an option. That after a couple of years, you realize, well, I can't play at this level. Like, I just can't. I'm just not at this level. But I still think I'm a good football player, and I still think I can play at the MAC school or the FCS school or the D2 school. And the transfer portal facilitates that, and it makes it easy to sort of correct the course, right? It allows for a course correction. And so those kinds of guys, you probably don't want to get them back to Pitt. If there were WPIAL guys who left the area, went to some big time school, went to an SEC school or Big 12 or Big 10 school or something like that, turned down Pitt and went to that school, but then didn't really do anything, it might not be in anyone's best interest for them to come home. Now, MJ Devonshire, I don't think did a whole lot at Kentucky, and he's come back and he's had a great career, obviously. John Patrician didn't do much at Penn State. He came back and had a great career. We'll see what happens with Phil Dracovic. We'll see what happens if Donovan McMillan and or Derek Davis decide to come home. If those guys are able to... McMillan was okay at Florida. He wasn't in the starting lineup or anything like that after a couple years. Davis saw the field at LSU. But again, not a main contributor and not, like I say, not a starter. And so, maybe they see a better opportunity. And I think certainly for McMillan, I think there will be a real opportunity for him to step into Pitt's defense at safety if he does end up choosing the Panthers. But it'll just be interesting to watch as guys, so this year's recruiting class, Rodney Gallagher and Tamir Robinson, two top, the two top guys in the 2023 recruiting class that Pitt was after. And, Robinson's going to, Penn State. Gallagher's going to West Virginia. And I have no reason to think that they won't have success there. I have no reason to believe that they're going to opt into the transfer portal after a couple of years or whatever it is. But it'll be interesting to watch, and it'll be interesting to watch if they do go into the transfer portal in 2 years, do they try to come home and go back to Pitt? And then I kind of take it a step further and I started thinking, okay, if this happens a few more times, like let's say, you already have Devonshire, you already had the history of Patrician. Let's say Dracovic has a really good season, and let's say they do get McMillan or Davis, and those guys really excel. Is there a lesson there for some of the younger players still in the area, for some of the high school recruits coming up, of, hey, and certainly guys, some of these guys, if they follow that path, some of the players, if they end up transferring back to Pitt, could relate this from firsthand experience of, hey, I thought it was better out there, but it's actually better back here. And I'd be curious to see if that, I'm sort of reminded of 2013, really 2012, heading into the 2013 recruiting class when Pitt was recruiting Tyler Boyd. And, excuse me, 2014 when Pitt was recruiting Jordan Whitehead in the 2015 recruiting class. And one of the things Whitehead said about why he picked Pitt was that he looked at two situations. He looked at Tyler Boyd and he looked at Robert Foster. And Foster went to Alabama. Didn't really do anything. Boyd went to Pitt and had an incredible 3 years. And at that point he had an incredible freshman year, an incredible sophomore year. They played 1 year together, Whitehead and Boyd did, in 2015. But I think that really made an impact on Whitehead of saying, okay, I could go to Alabama and be, and maybe play and maybe get overshadowed by 5 other guys who are better than me. Or I could go to Pitt and be one of the best players in the field. I could play early. I could play often. I could probably win a bunch of games. And I could have fun. You know what I mean? I can actually get on the field and contribute the way Tyler Boyd is. Because you had that sort of, I don't want to call it a cautionary tale, but you had that comparison of Boyd versus Foster. And I wonder if sort of a similar thing will happen over the next few years. If somehow WPIAL guys keep transferring back to Pitt, I wonder if it'll then sort of trickle down to the high school prospects. Now, sort of the flip side of that is if it does trickle down, maybe the lesson that trickles down is not, hey, I should just go to Pitt in the first place. It's, let's go out and see the world. And if I get a year or two into it and I'm still not really playing or contributing, then I can come back home. I can be with family and friends, and I can play at Acrisure Stadium, and I can play at Pitt and all that stuff. That might be the other message that gets sent. It might not be just go to Pitt in the first place. It might be, yeah, do this. Go to another school for a year or two, then come back to Pitt if it doesn't work out. You don't want to be the fallback option like that, but if these are good players, you know what I mean? Like an MJ Devonshire, like I think a Donovan McMillan is. You know, if these are good players, then you know you do it. You set aside any pride or hurt feelings, and that's the funny thing about Donovan McMillan. You know, he's a 4-star safety at Peters Township. If you recall his recruitment, he was so excited about Pitt. I mean, just fired up about Pitt. Just all the nicest things you could possibly say about getting an offer from Pitt and everything, all the way up until the point when he released the top 10 and Pitt wasn't in it. There were some hard feelings about that. You know, I mean, I don't think Pitt was very happy about that. I don't think Pat Narduzzi was very happy about that. And certainly a lot of Pitt fans took it personally, but that was a couple years ago. And now he's one of the best safety prospects in the transfer portal. And you could use a safety like him, particularly if Brandon Hill goes to the NFL as we expect him to. And you could use a guy like Donovan McMillan to replace him, so you take him. You don't have hard feelings about it. You don't take it personally. He made a decision to go a different way, go a different path, follow a different path, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now you could use him. You could have used him a couple years ago, but now you can use him. And so you don't, you know, you can't have pride in this whole thing. You need to set that aside and make the best decisions for your team. And I think that's what that would be. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Like I say, as WPIAL guys go to schools other than Pitt, if they end up in the transfer portal in a couple of years, where do they go? Do they come back to Pitt? And if that happens a few times and they have success, does it become? Does it have an influence or an impact on Pitt's local recruiting going forward? It'll be interesting to watch, and it's certainly going to be interesting to watch this week as things develop with McMillan and Davis and any other portal prospects who come out or any other high school prospects that come out. It's going to be a wild 8 days. I mean, I'm pretty fairly confident of that. It's going to be a wild 8 days until next Wednesday. Next Wednesday will probably be a wild one too. So make sure you don't go anywhere. Right, we'll have all the coverage right here at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. While you're here, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video. We appreciate that. I hope you had a good start to the week. Hope Monday was a good day for you. Hope Tuesday's another one, and I can't wait to see what Tuesday brings. Whatever it is, we will be talking about it tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.